Hi friends, welcome back to Rafting Magazine, and today we are super excited because we have Ryan from How Not To, and we're out here with a line scale 3, is that right? Mm-hmm. And we've got a bunch of our paddles, we've got some oars, we're going to check out paddle strokes, see how these things work, and see how much force we're going to get out of them, which paddle strokes are stronger, and see a little comparison between these paddles. So let's get into it. So my name is Trevor from Rafting Magazine.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Ryan Jinks. And we're going to learn a little bit about paddles, what makes these different, and then we'll start stroking. Apparently this is more than just a wide part and a skinny part. So what's the anatomy of it?
Yeah, so over there by Trevor in his hand, he's got the T-grip, then we have the shaft, and then we have the blade. And this part of the shaft right here is the neck, and this part of the blade is the shoulder, and this part over here is the tip of the blade. We're going to be looking at a couple different kinds of paddles. This paddle here you can see has some curvature to it. It's a scoop blade paddle. This one is just a standard straight shaft, straight blade paddle. And then the next one is a bent shaft paddle. And you can see that the blade is not in line with the shaft. And it's typically a 15-degree offset. And what this does is allows the blade to be perpendicular to the water through the most powerful part of your stroke.
And obviously you have a couple different materials here.
Yep.
Do you think that'll change the actual performance, or is it just a weight difference?
So with the wood versus carbon fiber or fiberglass, there's definitely a weight difference. There are speculations about whether or not there's a power delivery difference, because like a glass shaft on this Werner Bandit here, that flexes more than the wood glass shaft on that Sawyer, and the laminated wood shaft on that Bending Branches is somewhere in between those two.
Because if you have flex, you're going to lose that power.
Yep.
Yeah.
So one of the things too with paddles is the weight of the paddle and the overall construction of it. So over there we have, this is like the typical unreinforced, it's just aluminum and plastic. It's literally, like I've broken so many of these over my hip.
You can see with this one, it's got
It's got a bender.
Yeah.
It's got your 15 degree up here.
Yeah, wrong place. Yeah,
in the wrong place.
So this paddle, I have always thought that this kind of paddle is not going to do much for you. I mean, you just don't get a lot of power out of it. And I think in an ascending order, I would say this one, followed by this reinforced paddle. There's a little bit more metal in here, right there, a little bit more plastic.
When you say reinforced, you're talking about at the neck?
Yes.
Yeah, and then there's a little bit thicker aluminum that's in the shaft.
Through the whole shaft.
You get flex, you're going to lose.
Yeah, that blade angle changes, and you'll actually feel chatter in the water as the blade rotates and the shaft flex, and that's kind of just, I don't know, discomforting feel.
Yeah.
And these are all like $15 to $20 paddles. Like, yeah, you can usually pick them up easily like that, or just in an eddy.
And so what's this looks the most expensive. How much is this one?
So it's actually not the most expensive.
Okay.
It's like $160, but it's a really good performing paddle. It's machine manufactured. There's not a whole bunch of handcrafting that goes into it. The Sawyers are more handcrafted. Some hand shaping that goes into those, and that's why that price point is different.
This is like $260 for this one, or
so $20, $200, yeah.
Yeah, it's like quite a bit different.
You get what you pay for.
Well,
Shocking.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Who would have thought?
But what's your money on for the most powerful paddle?
For the most powerful paddle, I actually think the Bending Branches bend shaft is going to deliver the most power to the boat.
I do too.
But that's not a paddle that I'm going to use in whitewater.
Yep.
Because I'm not going to reach out and I'm not going to do a sculling stroke. It is a forward stroking, J stroking only kind of paddle. And this one's 52 inches. Like, that's what I use for my tripping canoe. It is not what I use for getting downstream, because it doesn't have the same reach. I can't lean on it the same way.
What do you think, the Werner or the Sawyer is going to be?
Well, The idea behind the scoop blade is that you have more surface area in the same distance from the neck to the tip.
Do you think it's only like 5% different?
It's not much.
Yeah.
Typically, I go with this paddle because of the flex in the shaft, not as much the bite in the blade.
Gotcha.
But I would say a max of a 15% increase in power over a comparable shaft length in the Sawyer.
Well, that's what's great about today is
We get to find out.
so.
Yeah.
The way this experiment is set up is you're going to have two people in the raft.
Yeah, so we're gonna have Nathan and Kaylee. We're both similar sized paddlers.
Okay.
And we are going to have one person using the same paddle as a control for the experiment. And then Nathan, are you gonna be using the
Yep,
ones,
I'm
or-
gonna be the one that is changing blades and shafts.
So Nathan is gonna go through all of these paddles to see what it's like, and Kaylee is going to keep the same paddle. And we're gonna go 30 seconds of paddling.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're averaging out all of those paddle stroke powers over that 30-second span, trying to narrow out any variables as far as my delivery, but I'm going to try and remain as consistent with the amount of power that I'm putting in to my lower hand and through my core.
And how much of a break in between each one so you feel fresh-ish? 2 minutes?
2 minutes probably. I mean, we could go as short as a minute to expedite things, but
Yeah. It,
But the 30-second sprints are nothing in comparison to the thousands of strokes that I put in on a river. Like a 16-mile day of paddling is...
so you can do it for 30 seconds, we'll be all right?
Yeah, and we can maybe not even stop between it, and
We
probably...
gotta throw a Fitbit on our wrist
we need
to see how many
a-
strokes like we make.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll get some fairly well controlled power delivery, I think.
Cool. We'll also find out how hot I get in this suit, not getting in the water and putting
Right.
it on before this video started. All right, let's start stroking.
Now, if you haven't seen Ryan's video on YouTube, definitely go check that out. He has a really awesome video about all of the methodology of how we got to this point and what it looked like. But because a lot of our fans are boaters, I wanted to share what is super relevant to boaters, and that's all the data. So let's dive into it. And the first bit of data that I want to bring up is going to be what the peak forces were. So when we talked, Nathan guessed that a Werner Bandit was actually going to be the most powerful paddle out there. But, we had talked, and I thought the Sawyer Freefall was. And what were your thoughts?
From a strength perspective?
Sure, like maximum force output.
Yeah, I mean, I thought probably the heavier paddle would have more force, but you would also get fatigue over time. So I was kind of in the boat of one of the Sawyers being more powerful.
So what we did, and this is a cool thing, I broke this up by peak force, average force over the whole paddle duration, and I also looked at the minimum and maximum forces that came out of it. Now, I had to do a bunch of statistical analysis, so I had to take a bunch of standard deviations and then get rid of the outliers and make sure that we were paddling, and then it was a nightmare of statistics. But anyway, we did this all for you, so we have our list, and we're going to go through and give you that. So let's start with number one, strongest paddle out there.
What?
In our paddle power tests, it was a reinforced Carlisle basic paddle. This guy right here, 0.69 kilonewtons was the most powerful. So, oddly enough, of all the paddles, it was the strongest. Now, remember back to the experiment, Kaylee was a control, so Nathan was the one utilizing this paddle. But Second place was and I don't have it here, but it's the Bending Branches 14-degree cruiser paddle. As you might expect that to be, I would have expected that to be first place, honestly.
Why is that?
Just because of we were
bend?
only doing forward strokes. So doing that little bend adds a little bit of ergonomics that helps with the force. But clearly, force is also tied to the length of the paddle. And we talk about this a lot, like putting your hand at the neck of the paddle. But do you find that surprising, like that this thing was winner?
I mean, like I just said, I think that fatigue can definitely play a part with the heavier paddles because as you're going as hard as you can, you feel like kind of that twinge in your shoulder. You know, at least I do. But yeah, I think it's pretty surprising that over the duration that won out quite a bit more.
Right? Okay, so tied for third, we have the Canyon X, Freefall XD, and the piece of crap. So
well, that one's reinforced, so we have another one that's not reinforced. Is that the one you
I just brought this for illustrated proof. I think this is the one you were actually using.
I think
the
that
paddle.
was the control.
This was a control paddle, but
yeah.
I couldn't find that other one. We may have lost it. Probably broke or something. I just think I set it down lightly, or a breeze kicked up and it just disintegrated. I don't know. So, of all of this, everything was within 0.05 kilonewtons, which is not a lot of force. That's like tens of pounds. In fact, we can figure that out exactly. So, but the thing that's really interesting that I found personally was that the Werner Bandit was actually the worst at peak performance.
Yeah, and I can kind of see because that paddle has a bend and snap, and the snap is what really gives you a lot of that strength, I think, in your paddle. And with this test, it's not able to do that. So that makes sense that it was the weakest in this particular test. Because I feel like you were only actually getting half of the paddle's worth in the test. I don't know if that's accurate, but because it
when I
doesn't
watched the video, like when I go through and watch it, and we're not going to make you guys watch all of this, but when I went through and watched the video, it was interesting because it wasn't the case. You guys were getting full paddle strokes. You were starting from a ways back and then charging and then kind of snapping snapping forward. So it was almost like you were shock loading the dynamometer. And so we basically took the peaks across all of that and made that. So just so everybody knows out there too, the difference between 3 that were tied for third and the strongest unreinforced paddle, that's 11 pounds of force.
that between all of them, or like which?
Yeah,
how does it rank?
like the reinforced the reinforced Carlisle paddle. This guy right here.
Oh.
Yeah.
What? This one.
This one.
You're blocking.
Oh yeah. No. So this reinforced Carlisle paddle. This paddle. The difference between Okay. Done with that. The difference between that one and all of the ones that were tied for third was only 11 pounds of force.
Between that one and all the other ones?
Between all the other. So the Bending Branches paddle.
Yeah.
I'm going to pop this up on the screen for everybody to see, but it's going to go Carlisle reinforced paddle at 0.69 kilonewtons. Bending Branches 14-degree cruiser at 0.65 kilonewtons. The unreinforced cheapo paddle, the Canyon X, and the Freefall from Sawyer were all 0.64. However, in very last place, Werner Bandit was actually an outlier at 0.54 kilonewtons of force. That was a peak force that you and Nathan with that generated, which was fascinating. I mean, I thought that paddle would do more. And again, this is peak force. So this is the highest outlier of peak force that we have. So that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
I thought. So now let's dial it back though. That's the highest outlier, but we want to look at like the averages. Well, Nathan said highest average force was going to be on the Werner Bandit, and he thought it would be about 15% stronger than anything else. Turns out that was not the case. It was actually 25% weaker on average than the Sawyer Freefall XD. So the Sawyer Freefall XD came in first, 0.54 kilonewtons. Sawyer Canyon X came in second at 0.53 kilonewtons. And the reinforced Carlisle paddle came in at 0.52 kilonewtons. Oddly enough, the El Cheapo came in at 0.47, which was not the lowest. The lowest was actually a tie between the Werner Bandit and the Bending Branches 14-degree cruiser paddle. Mm. Now what we're going to look at is the range of strength, which is going to be the peak strength at the top end and then the minimum strength at the bottom end. And what this is going to measure statistically would be the consistency of the strength of the strokes.
Yeah.
The lower the number, the better, because you're going to have more consistent paddle strokes. Can you guess which paddle it was?
Well, I would think it would be the Sawyer.
Which one?
Freefall, but but it sounds like just a regular reinforced paddle was the best.
You're actually right in your first assumption.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Sawyer Freefall XD had the lowest range. That means at its top end and its bottom end, it had the most consistent paddle stroke.
Yeah. Okay.
Followed by the Sawyer Canyon X, and then by the Werner Bandit.
Oh, interesting.
It's surprising because the Werner Bandit has been, in this test, has been consistently underperforming.
Yeah.
Even El Cheapo paddle. But the reality is, after this, the reinforced Carlisle paddle is going to be the next one, followed by El Cheapo, and then Bending Branches. Bending Branches paddle, in terms of the strength of that paddle stroke, was all over the place.
Okay.
It was 0.44 kilonewtons, which is a pretty large range when you're talking, like, the high end of the range was only 0.65. I mean...
And in the test, you're just paddling as hard as you can for like 30 seconds, or a minute or something like that. So it's pretty surprising that that paddle had such a variation in paddle strength in that short of a period.
Yeah.
It's pretty surprising.
It's like I don't understand why the paddle strength was all over the place like that, but I mean, I guess it's not a whitewater paddle. So, yeah. I mean, you're paddling in whitewater with a paddle that's designed for flat water. What you're looking at, like a consistent, like water column is what you're trying to paddle in with that paddle, not an inconsistent one. So I could see how potentially that might influence it, but again, you know, I don't want to be too hasty to draw too many conclusions with this, but the Werner Bandit was interesting because it scored third place in this, and it wasn't too far off from the Canyon X. They were almost to the same. They're pretty spot on. So that's a surprising sort of thing.
Because they're different, like very different materials, and they feel very different in the paddle stroke performance. The Werner and the Sawyer, yeah.
But in terms of consistency, they were consistently similar.
Yeah.
In their strokes. So, you know, I don't have good data for all of this because of the time intervals and how they are. But when you look at the trend lines for all of these things, it was actually fascinating too, because in some of the paddle strokes, you guys were actually, your trend line was increasing. So as you made more strokes, you were trending higher and higher in strength of your paddle strokes. And in some of them, you were trending lower and lower. Now, I don't have all of the data in front of me. And then it's kind of all over the place and really messy. It's going to take me hours and hours to try and make that work. But what I can tell you, though, is that of the paddles El Cheapo and the Werner Bandit were actually the two paddles where over the 30 seconds of paddling, your strength actually increased. Everything else it decreased, as I would expect.
Yeah, I think because those are two of the lightest paddles that are going to be more of a straight shaft rather than the bending branches one. But those ones are the lightest. So that kind of makes sense that you would not find that fatigue.
We're going to set the paddle-to-paddle comparison aside for a second. We did another test in here. And the other test that was really cool was our forward paddle stroke and maximum power for as long as you could. In our preferred paddle, you using your Canyon X and Nathan using his Werner Bandit. We looked at how much paddle power you got at peak, and it was 0.99 kilonewtons. So you're going to be pulling 222.6 pounds, which is, so if you include your body weight, your gear, Nathan's body weight, Nathan's gear, and the boat, you're pulling about half of that weight, the two of you together, per paddle stroke, which is a lot of force. I mean, 222 pounds of force is not insignificant. And when we start talking about oars in a second, this will become really clear. But the average that you got was 0.74, so it was a little less than that. 0.99 was your peak.
Yeah.
And then your range of force was 0.54 kilonewtons, which was 0.1 kilonewtons higher than the bending branches one. So what that means is your paddle strokes, when you were doing maximum paddle power, were actually all over the place.
Yeah.
Your range of force was almost, your range of force was more than half of your maximum force.
Well, and we were going for as long as we could, so we got pretty fatigued. Also, I think we were talking about, like, how hard can you actually paddle? And we were like, we need some fear to, like, be a driver. Like, we're like, oh, if we don't make the rapid, we're going to die. Like, but, like, we're actually, like, moving class 1. So it wasn't like that scary. So I think if we had some like alligators or something, we could have gotten a little bit higher.
I wonder like how much adrenaline causes that.
Yeah, because there's no adrenaline. So I think that's gonna play a part as far as like how hard can you actually paddle.
Okay, next paddle test. We gotta go run. We gotta go run a class 5 rapid, and at the bottom of the class 5 rapid, we need to have the thing set up. Once you enter the eddy, you're going to turn, stop, we're going to clip you up, and then you two got to paddle as hard as you can, as fast as you can for 30 seconds. And then that'll tell us how much different adrenaline plays into it.
Or just add some hippos or something.
Where are we going to get it? Never mind.
I know a guy.
I hope you don't know a guy with a hippo. So, okay. Moving over to back paddle strokes. So I was surprised by this. The difference between back paddle and forward paddle. So if we look at peak force, for the forward paddle, it was 0.99. For the back paddle, it was 0.66. So exactly 33% less force for a back paddle. So what this means is that your back paddle is 33% weaker than your forward paddle. So I like to use back paddle a lot when I'm creek boating.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's stronger. Turns out it's not.
Well, I mean, it might feel stronger because you've been forward paddling for a good part of the day. And so it's like you're using muscles that you haven't used as much. So I think fatigue over time could play a difference.
For sure, because you're using kind of different muscles for it.
Yeah.
The interesting thing was, though, that the range was 0.54 kilonewtons for the forward paddle, but it was 0.36 for the back paddle. So the back paddle is actually consistently, it's more consistent by like 40%.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of like when I back paddle, I feel like I might rotate more, have like a more rotation in that than when I forward paddle. So I think that extra rotation rather than just like a straightforward, and straight's not the right word, but
like that leaning, like forward and back kind of stroke.
Yeah, because when I back, I definitely have more rotation, and I feel like that can take away from like overall force potentially because your momentum's at a slightly different type of rotation.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a physicist that we know we could ask about this. I believe it would have something to do with what's on your shirt, but we're going to ask him. Okay, so the real fun part now is oar strokes. Mm-hmm. And we hooked Nathan up to a rowing machine, which was just his machine, and we made him row.
He is the machine.
He is the machine. So our rowing machine, Nathan, was able to pull 1.41 kilonewtons of force. Mm-hmm. However, he was only able to push at 0.82. So, why this is important? An R2 team has higher peak force, but they also have higher average force, because the average force for an R2 team was 0.74 at their strongest, whereas for oars, it was 0.65. So you're actually stronger forward paddling than you are pushing on oars. And I always thought oars would be stronger pushing over an R2 team. I would like to know what an R4 team can do.
Yeah.
Because if we're looking at two people who are able to put 0.99 kilonewtons of force onto it, it would stand to reason that a team of 4 should be able to do at least half of that, 1.5. So you have someone who's a really strong class 5 oarsman who is rowing at 1.41 kilonewtons when he's pulling. If an R4 team can do more than that on the forward paddle, that actually makes an interesting argument for paddle boating versus rowing.
Yeah, but you're going to have less weight rowing. If it's not a gear boat, I mean, if it's a gear boat, it's going to be way more. But at the same time, like if you're R4ing, then maybe you're pulling more weight with everybody.
Questions. Well, it leads to a lot of questions, though. Like, obviously, what does an R4 team do? We only tested it with R2.
Well, and one of those people is going to be guiding, so they're not going to... I wouldn't think they would have as much force because they've got to direct the boat.
Potentially, unless they were unless you had, an R4 team, if everybody's paddling together at once, I mean, I could see it with raft racers that they would be consistently stronger potentially, but we don't know. It's a question for the next video.
Yeah.
So make sure you're paying attention. But, so what we'll do is we'll break down all of this in a little analysis phase here. So let's do that. Okay, so analysis time. Let's look at the analysis here. Paddling forward is stronger than pushing with oars. Fascinating fact. If I was in a rescue boat, I would be wanting oars. And like traditionally, that's what people would say. Like, hey, let's have oars. Now I'm reconsidering that. However, that being said, if I was trying to rescue someone pulling, I can pull about 40% more than an R2 team could forward paddle. So when I look at it like that, I would say if I had 2 bow paddlers in a rescue boat, that would be more efficient than an R2 team. Because the bow paddlers could add their paddle power and then they could put down their paddles and rescue victims. So I'm interested in hooking up a kayaker too. And I wish we had a kayaker there that day. And, next time we go out, let's find a kayaker and we need to hook them up. But I'm interested to hook up a kayaker and see how much a kayaker can put on that, especially if we could get somebody in the water. This would be a great test. If we had a kayaker, someone grabbing onto the back of the kayak and then clipped into a rescue harness and attached to the dynamometer. how much force could a kayaker pull, both laden and unladen? Because a lot of people use safety kayakers. Now, if you're on the Zambezi or something like that and you're trying to like get away from hippos.
So African, not European.
Yeah, like Africa, I could see you dodging into a current, pulling somebody back into the current and continuing downstream. But like Europe, America, South America, like any of the Americas, anywhere that's not hippos and crocodiles, honestly. I would say that having an oar boat with an oar paddle combo for safety might be your best bet from a pure strength standpoint. So let's go back to paddles though. And let's look at scientifically, what is the best paddle we tested? I am going to say, based on the data, Sawyer Freefall XD is the best paddle we tested from in almost every category that I listed in both. So in peak force, it was close. I mean, we're talking 0.05 kilonewtons, which is 11 pounds of force, which could be an anomaly. I mean, especially because the Werner Bandit was only 0.54. So, it's hard to say in terms of peak force. And again, we don't have the perfect test, but based on the numbers that we're seeing, Sawyer, you guys are doing a good job. So shout out to you guys for making a decent paddle. But the free fall is the best in terms of all of the categories, with the exception of peak force, which it got 3rd place in. And then the 2nd place paddle would be the Canyon X. And so this paddle right here, which is super pretty, that is going to be 2nd place, Kaylee's preferred paddle. And what's interesting is the weight on these two paddles is pretty high. And they have kind of high swing weights, which is the interesting thing, because when you're talking hundreds of paddle strokes in a day, I would actually be interested in putting like some sort of like exercise computer on you or something like that
throughout the day
to like see, I want to say something that measures your heart rate and like exertion. I wonder how much like energy the energy output is. But anyway, the bottom line is that those are going to have a higher swing weight than something else. It seems like you'll be able to paddle more. And when I look at the fatigue and kind of the messy numbers, the messy trends that are coming out seem to be that as you paddle more with those Sawyer paddles, you're actually going to get more fatigued in a short sprint. However, if you paddle with one of the lightweight paddles, you're actually going to have less fatigue because, again, the trend lines show that you're exerting more force as you're getting your cadence and rhythm going. Yeah. So
I don't know. It's hard. I wish we could have it in a real scenario of whitewater. And of course that would depend on what river you do. So there's endless variations that you could add to doing the test. Because the reason that I personally changed my paddle from just a reinforced, regular paddle was as over time making less paddle strokes and having it have more power to, I guess, in each paddle stroke. So I'm making my moves in less strokes than I am with the other paddles. So that's why I switched. And in sprints, you definitely like feel it and you can get tired faster. But I think in a day, I tend to have less fatigue because those paddles are stronger.
So let's look at the thing that I'm always hesitant. I'm kind of hesitant to bring up, simply because, Sawyer that sent us some paddles, and being, pro athletes ourselves. I hate to say this when we have especially our sponsors watching. But so sorry, Sawyer, and sorry, Werner, but according to the data, it actually doesn't matter what paddle you have in terms of peak force. And even in average force, it almost doesn't matter. Like a reinforced Carlisle is almost as good as a Sawyer Freefall. I mean, we're talking this paddle's like $25 unless you find it in the river. I mean, if you're
It's almost free.
if you're a boater, like you might find these for free in the river. If you work for an outfitter, you might have these. If you have a pro deal with NRS, this would be $25. This paddle right here, though, this is like a $260 paddle. And I hate to say this, but there's practically no difference in the paddle power of the tests that we did. Now, the tests
Of the tests that we did.
we
In
did.
the limited way that we could test them.
But the point still remains that this doesn't test everything.
No.
So what this does test is it tests the strength of the paddle. So scientifically speaking, in our meager little science way, of the tests that we did, it really doesn't matter what paddle that you select in terms of force. And I always thought it did. And a lot of people swear by it. What it does do if you buy a nicer paddle, it decreases that range, so you're not all over the place with your paddle strokes. You have more consistent strength if you get a nicer paddle, as we've seen, because the top paddles were Freefall, Canyon, and Bandit. So the carbon and glass and wood paddles, the super nice ones that you're going to spend $200 on, those give you more consistent paddle strokes. But the whole reason that you would buy a nice paddle,
Paddle strength.
you always complain about your back. So it's your back. I mean, honestly, my back feels better when I paddle with a good paddle. I feel like I can more consistently pull my strokes, which is reflected in the data. You're more consistently paddling properly.
Yeah.
But I don't know. How does your back feel when you're paddling with this stuff?
My back definitely feels better, but you want to make sure that the weight ratio is going to be right for you. Because, sometimes if it's too heavy for you, then you can have, shoulder fatigue or something like that. And I think training comes into that as well, of just making sure you're doing other types of exercises other than just paddling, to kind of get all your muscle groups even. So if you're not doing that, I feel like you're going to tweak different parts of your body regardless. But yeah, I mean, there's still a reason I switched, and I'll still stick with my Sawyer, because I have seen in the field it outperforming anything else.
The data shows that.
Yeah.
I mean, your Sawyer was second place consistently, with the exception of peak force, in which it tied for third by a very low margin, mind you. So there it is. There's the results of our test. Sorry, Sawyer. Sorry, Werner. And any other paddle manufacturers who would like to throw us some paddles to test, we would be happy to do that. But for all you watching and all you boaters out there, that old adage of don't blame the equipment, blame the user, is actually pretty spot on. Like, a good boater should be able to pull a consistent paddle stroke with anything. I mean, any paddle is going to get, even El Cheapo, like, that did pretty well. That tied with the Sawyer Freefall. So, I mean, it's like, from that standpoint, it's hard to argue with that data. But I think that gives us a better idea of what we're looking for, and also raises a lot of questions about other tests. So if you have some questions about what you would like to see from a paddle test or a paddle you would like to see us test, let us know. Drop those in the comments below. And if you have any questions about the data or questions about our methods and what we did, you can also check out Ryan Jenks' video. I'll leave a link to that as well, which is super entertaining. Totally should check that out. And it'll show you all of the sweat and ridiculousness that we put into actually doing this test, which was a lot.
Literally sweat. It was very hot that day. We were in dry suits.
That was a hot day. So, thanks so much for sticking with us for all the way through this video, and love having you on the channel. And again, if you have questions, drop them below, and we will catch you on the flip side.